Chapter 23. Tidying Up.
I'll explain everything to you, but first we need to get out of here.
I promised David. I looked up at John and Diane, who were both grinning at me.
Hey!
A voice shouted. Seth came limping out into the hallway toward us, using his sword as a makeshift cane. He stopped.
Oh. You got him? Good.
He muttered. David staggered to his feet, and by that time, Seth had shuffled down to where we were. Huxley still lay on the ground, beaten to a bloody mess.
What do we need to do with him?
I asked Diane. Before she could respond, Seth drove his sword into the place where Huxley's heart would be, but it glanced off his skin just as it had before. A low rumbling came from Huxley's body. If I had to guess, it was a laugh mocking Seth's attempt to end his life.
Shouldn't we take him prisoner?
I offered. We all exchanged uneasy glances. None of us knew the correct answer. Seth looked my brother up and down and offered him the sword.
You do it.
He sniffed. David eyed the blade but hesitated.
I'm not strong enough.
Seth admitted reluctantly. David nodded and took the sword. Gripping it in both hands, he positioned it over Huxley's heart and drove it down into his chest. Just as before, Huxley's skin resisted the blade, but David didn't let up and he bore down harder. The blade slowly sank into Huxley's chest and pierced his heart. Huxley let out a choking wheeze and then lay silent. It was over. Seth pulled the blade out of Huxley and sheathed it.
I'm glad you decided to get up and walk around because I'm in no state to carry you.
He huffed. David gave me a confused look, but I just shrugged.
Come on, let's get out of here.
I motioned. The four of us ran down the hallway toward the exit. I still had the detonator that Diane had given me. I couldn't wait to hit the button and bury Fort Romekin forever. We turned and cut back through the warehouse, where we found that the blast door was now open. Huxley must have left it open when he came after us. We continued back through the corridors to the surface. No one spoke. Our only goal was to leave this place as fast as possible. While we jogged, I thought back to what Diane had mouthed before she left Vernix and me alone to have our standoff. Between breaths, I asked,
Diane, what did you say back before you left the room? I couldn't make it out.
Diane, still running, leaned over to bump me affectionately with her shoulder.
I said, we'll wait for you.
They weren't going to leave me even though I gave them the opportunity. Maybe I could trust them after all. When we reached the surface, I saw that the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon. It was hard to believe all of the fights and revelations had taken place over one measly day. I took a deep breath, savoring the fresh air. It was over now, and that's what mattered. John produced a small phone.
Amy,
He barked.
we're ready. Get us out of here.
I heard a screeching sound followed by the appearance of an aircraft. It was the plane we had used to get to the fort. A rope ladder unfurled from the cabin and hit the ground in front of us. John waved us toward it.
Come on.
He shouted. Diane and John scrambled up the ladder. I hesitated and gave Fort Romekin a final look. I had spent a lot of time here. Some of it was good. Most of it was painful.
Hey,
Seth called.
come on.
He climbed slowly up the ladder, still hindered by his injuries. My brother and I made our way up the ladder and into the aircraft. Diane and John were waiting for us, offering us each a hand up into the cabin. Seth had already collapsed into the nearest chair and shut his eyes. The co-pilot in the flowery shirt was at the front of the cabin, pretending to care that we were out of our seats and dangerously close to the door.
You ready to bury this place forever?
John asked. I held up the detonator and nodded.
Are we far enough away to blow this place up?
Diane shouted to the co-pilot with the flowery shirt. He thought for a moment and shrugged.
We're good to go,
Said Diane, giving a thumbs up.
It's going to be one heck of a show.
As we watched the fort shrink below us, I jammed my thumb down on the detonator. The ground below us heaved upwards and shattered. Fire and ash erupted from the land. The shockwave from the blast shook the plane, and for a moment, I feared we'd fall out of the sky. The sound of twisting metal and shearing concrete filled the air. When the explosion finished, all that was left of Fort Romkin was a crater in the ground. The walls, buildings, and tunnels had all been wiped out and collapsed. It was erased from the earth. As the smoke drifted into the sky, the plane gained speed and jetted off toward the horizon. We shut the cabin door, but John, Diane, David, and I each found a window and watched as the crater where the fort once stood slipped out of sight. John and I helped David into a seat while Diane retrieved the food cart from before.
Anyone hungry?
She chimed, as cheerful as ever. Seth was already asleep in his chair, but John and I raised our hands. David raised his clawed hand, but then put it down. He rubbed it self-consciously. Diane wheeled down the aisle toward him.
Don't worry.
She cooed.
We're all a bit strange here. You'll fit in just fine.
She reassured. She lobbed him a thick sandwich wrapped in cellophane, which David caught with his clawed left hand.
Thanks.
He said gratefully.
You too.
Diane chirped as she hurled a sandwich at my head. I managed to catch it, but Diane moved on down the aisle to sit with John before I had a chance to complain about her behavior. I grumbled as I unwrapped the sandwich and hungrily stuffed it into my mouth. I glanced over at my brother. He hadn't started to eat. Of course, how could he?
David,
I said to get his attention. He replied listlessly.
do you want to ask me some questions or do you want me to explain how I got here?
I asked.
Explain it to me. My memory is still a little fuzzy. I remember joining the army and going through my day-to-day life, but then it all just goes black before I wake up after having killed someone, and you and these people are there.
He quavered. So, I told him what had happened. I told him how he had stopped sending letters home and seemingly disappeared. I told him how I disguised myself and joined the military to look for him. I told him how I got caught but stayed anyway, because the people there were good and decent. I explained to him that Seth had killed General Dunn. With great sadness, I told him how my squad had been killed by the same man we now shared a plane with. I recounted the chilling speech Huxley had given and how I'd been forced to flee back to our home. I filled him in on how, years later, Diane had approached me about finding him, how I'd gone with them despite what Seth had done. I described the underground and the people working to make the world a better place. I told him about how we'd infiltrated the base, the fights, and where we'd found him. I told him about Huxley and the revelation that his, my, and Seth's blood made us different, and how the military had used it for their sick experiments. I told him how I'd injected him with my and Seth's blood, and how he'd beaten Huxley in a trance. Us escaping, he already knew about. I finished by telling him how much time had passed. David listened quietly. He seemed to take it well. He just nodded and asked the odd, clarifying question. Quietly, he unwrapped his sandwich and started to take small bites.
Do you think the people at this place, the underground, will be able to fix me?
He asked, lifting his strange new arm off the armrest of the seat.
I don't know,
I admitted.
but even if they can't, we'll make it work. We always have.
He gave me a small smile, but I could tell he was still processing everything I'd told him. I understood that it was a lot to take in.
Do you have anything else you want to ask?
I offered.
No.
David replied.
I just want to try and get some sleep. I feel like I've been hit by a bus.
All right.
I said. David leaned his seat back and fell asleep almost instantly. I moved to sit near John and Diane, who were each finishing a plate of gourmet-looking pasta.
So,
I started.
the mission is complete and I guess it's a success. What happens when we get back? What's next?
I asked.
Nothing too different from a normal military mission.
Explained John.
We'll get medical care for our injuries, a bit of rest, and then undergo a debriefing.
That wasn't the entire answer that I wanted,
What about my brother and I?
I pressed.
He was asking if someone at the underground could help him with his arm and his body.
I explained.
If that's what he wants, we can try, but why would he?
Diane shrugged, confused.
He's extraordinary now.
she asserted. John nudged Diane, and a look of regret touched her face and disappeared the next instant.
It's up to you guys.
She stressed.
We'll give you any help we can.
But I hope you consider staying.
John added.
The underground can always use more good people, and you'd both be more than welcome.
He finished with a smile. I hadn't considered staying. I never saw it as an option. I stole a look at Seth. Could I really continue to work with him after what he'd done?
Can we have some time to think about it and talk it over? David's not really in any shape to be making any big decisions right now.
Of course.
Said John.
Now buckle up and get some rest. We'll be back at the underground before you know it.
I nodded and went back to the seat next to my brother. He was still sound asleep, and a bit of drool was starting to leak from the corner of his mouth. I leaned back and looked out the window. The clouds passed by us, still not caring about what had changed in the world below. I focused on finding shapes in them. A cow, a sheep, an eagle-headed gorilla. I felt myself drifting off into sleep. The difference was that this time it was dreamless and peaceful,